Good morning, everybody. Oh, I forgot one thing. Joanna, could you just pass me my bag, please? I don't normally get dressed in public, but today I have to. Yeah, thank you so much. So whilst I get dressed in public, it'll only take a few seconds. Right, there we go. I feel dressed now. Some of you may be wondering why I'm wearing this particular hat. I'll explain in a few seconds. But before I do that, let me just explain a little bit about myself. My name is David Kuo, and I was born in Hong Kong many, many years ago, too many years that I care to remember. I was born in Hong Kong, and I came to Singapore when I was approximately 12 years of age, and I've been here ever since. During the intervening period, I studied here in Singapore, I went to school in Singapore, and then I went abroad. I went away to university, and I stayed away far too long. But now I'm back in Singapore, and I'm back with the Motley, a company which I've been with for over 12 years now, getting on for 13 years. And about the Motley. The jester's cap that I wear exemplifies what the Motley is all about. The Fool, for those of you who don't know, was the only person who in Victorian times was allowed to tell the king the truth about what was going on in his kingdom. He could tell the king the truth without having his head cut off, as long as he did it amusingly and with humor. And this is something that we embrace here at the Motley Fool. We try and tell the truth about what is going on in the financial world, what is going on in your lives. I mean, you've heard this morning from Richard and also from Mr. Chu about the threats of inflation. I will be touching on the threats of inflation a bit later on. It is a huge threat, and it is one that you don't feel at the moment. And I'll also explain why you're not feeling it that badly at the moment, but eventually you will. But more about the Motley Fool. The Motley Fool was started by two brothers, Tom and David Gardner, and they wanted to tell the truth about what was going on in the financial world. They wanted to tell people that they could look after their own finances. You don't need to go to an advisor to look after your finances. All you need to do is to have certain tools in your hands, and then you can start investing. You can start looking after your own finances, and you can start preparing for your future. It is a very long-term plan. And in my case, I've already started my son. The moment he turned 18, I started investing together with him. I didn't invest for him, I invested together with him. And he is now quite competent at looking after his own finances. It's taken him a few years, but he is quite competent at looking after his own finances now. And I suspect that by the time he reaches my age, he'll probably be richer than I ever will be, because he started a lot sooner than I did. And that is really the key. The sooner you start, the more you will accumulate over time, as Mr. Chu said. Investing regularly over a period of time, forgetting about what is going on in the marketplace, forgetting about the volatility, just keep on investing. And at the end of that period, you should become a lot wealthier than you are today. So anyway, what are we talking about when we're talking about looking for good companies? Now, I came across this quote, and it's a quote from Collis Potter Huntington. And he said about his company, "We shall build good ships here, at a profit if we can, at a loss if we must, but we will always build good ships." And that is really the secret of looking for good companies. You are looking for businesses that have a long-term aim, businesses that plan for the future. During the short term, they may have problems. Now, in the case of this particular company, Mr. Huntington's company, it is now part of Northrop, and it got taken over. And it is now part of this big defense company in America called Northrop Grumman. But his belief was that you have to plan for the long term. Similarly, as investors, we may invest in a company where it may make short-term losses, or sometimes the share price may not perform as well as we think it should. But that doesn't mean that we should sell the shares straight away. Just because the company is having a short-term problem doesn't mean that we should immediately phone up our brokers and go, sell, sell, sell. Because you have to understand what is the purpose of the company. And if you don't understand the purpose of the company, then you're not investing. You are merely speculating. You are a trader. And that is the difference between investing and trading. Lots of people have very traditional methods for deciding whether or not a company is a good investment. We look at price to earnings, we look at dividend yields, we look at price to book, we look at levels of debt, and we think, oh, that's all we need to know. But recently, somebody asked me, was Genting Singapore a good investment? And I said, why is it that you want to know whether or not Genting Singapore is a good investment? And they said, oh, their broker phoned them up. And their broker said, oh, Genting Singapore is going to have a problem. And I said, what problem is that? And they said, well, this bird flu thing that's going on, it's going to stop the high rollers from coming into Singapore, so I suggest you sell Genting Singapore now. I said, okay, so think about it. How many high rollers are going to be affected? And in 10 years' time, will we remember what impact the bird flu will have on Genting's long-term plan? I said, think about these things. When a broker phones you up, what is the broker trying to get you to do? The broker is trying to get you to trade. The broker wants you to sell Genting Singapore and buy Genting Malaysia instead. And then in a few weeks' time, they'll phone up and say, oh, you know what? The bird flu thing wasn't as bad as we thought it was going to be. So sell Genting Malaysia, buy Genting Singapore now, because everything's going to be okay. Think of all the high rollers that are coming in. These are the things you have to focus on when people tell you about certain companies. Look at a company. I'm not saying Genting Singapore is a good investment over the long term, but if you believe in the strategy of the company, if you believe that the company has a long-term plan, that its future is going to be rosy, then what happens in the short term over a period of, say, a couple of weeks or a couple of months is irrelevant over the 10, 20-year period that I hope you'll be investing in some of these companies. Now, who are these four people? We've got Ben Bernanke, we've got Mervyn King, soon to be replaced at the Bank of England. We've got Mario Draghi, and we've got the new banker at the Bank of Japan, Haruhiko Kuroda. And what are they doing? They are trying to save their own economies right now. They are printing money as though it is going out of fashion. We are talking about billions of pounds, trillions of dollars, trillions of euros, trillions of yen being pumped into the system. And they are all involved in this thing which I call the race to the bottom. They are trying to get their currency as low as possible so that they can lift asset prices, lift inflation, and push down interest rates so that their economies have a chance of survival. The upshot of all of this is inflation. They all have an idea that the way they can save their economies is to drive down interest rates, drive up inflation, because inflation is the only way that they can solve the big problem that they have on their books right now, which is national debt. We are talking about trillions of dollars, trillions of yen, trillions of euros, billions of pounds. Actually, it's getting close to £1 trillion now of national debt. And there is absolutely no way that they can ever pay down that debt because they haven't got the money to do so. Now, some of you are thinking, oh, inflation's not a huge problem. David's scaring us here. He's talking about inflation. I don't know how many of you are gardeners here, whether you live in condos. In the UK, I had a garden, and I have a garden still, I hope. And one day, I was watering the garden. Put the hosepipe on. I said to my wife, oh, can you just turn the water on for me? Nothing happened. Nothing came out the hose. I said, turn it on fuller. Some more water, please. Still nothing happened. This is what is happening to inflation right now. This little bubble you see here is inflation. We are only seeing a little bit at the moment. This guy here, looking at the inflation, looking at his inflation hose, saying, there's no inflation, it's okay. It's only 4.9% here in Singapore, what's the problem? Unfortunately, when all of this money eventually starts to come out, when we're talking about these trillions of dollars, trillions of yens, billions of pounds, trillions of euros, once they start to filter through the system, once they start to come through, this guy's going to take his foot off the hose. And that inflation is going to hit you really, really hard. Ben Bernanke recently said, oh, quantitative easing, this printing of money, will help to boost the global economy. That's what he says. What he meant to say was, our currency, your problem. That's essentially what he's saying. If I want to lower the US dollar, if I want to get the US dollar as low as possible, it's my currency, your problem. I mean, this was a quote that was attributed to Secretary John Connolly back in 1971, when they did exactly the same thing. And they're doing it again today. They are lowering the value of their currency. Sorry, Scott, I know you're an American. Yeah, so I don't want to be disrespectful to the Americans, but that is what they're doing, because that is the only solution they have. They have this problem with debt. There are only three things you can do with national debt. You can service it, which means that you pay it down, keep on paying the interest, and hopefully you can try and reduce the amount of debt that you have. You can default on it, and I don't think anybody here will ever imagine that America, Europe, Japan, or the UK will ever default on their debts, because that would be completely unthinkable. So the final way they can get rid of debt is to inflate it away. So slowly they will just inflate away the debt in real terms. So what exactly does a 4.9% inflation rate for you here in Singapore mean? If we carried on with 4.9% inflation, it means that 1,000 Singapore dollars today will be only worth $600 in real terms in 10 years' time. So if you were looking at that HD smart TV, 1,000 Singapore dollars, in 10 years' time, your same 1,000 Singapore dollars will not buy you that HD smart TV. It will buy you a small portable set, like the one I've got at the moment. So what you need to do in order to beat inflation over the long term is to try and invest in inflation-beating assets. And Mr. Chu's already alluded to the fact that cash is not going to do it, bonds are not going to do it. There are only two other assets, property and shares. Those are the only two other assets that beat inflation over the long term. Most of you already have a property, so how many more properties do you want? And the other problem with property is it's not easy to get rid of that asset when you need it. When you want to sell that asset, it's not easy to sell. You phone up your estate agent and say, I want to sell my condo now. And they go, yeah, back of the queue. Yeah, there are lots of people wanting to sell their condos right now. It's not an easy asset to get rid of. Whereas with shares, yes, you can. And also with shares, you can sell a little bit of the asset when you want to. If I have a portfolio of 10,000 Singapore dollars, if I need 5,000, I can sell 5,000 of those, $5,000 worth of those shares today. Phone up your broker and you can sell it. How do you sell half a building? I'd like to sell a window, please, yeah? Or maybe I'll sell a door. You can't sell a house brick by brick. So it gives you that flexibility if you invest in shares. That's the difference between property and shares. There are other differences. You can't live in a portfolio, but you can live in a property. But most of us have a property anyway. So traditional methods of valuing shares. We use these things called, what I call the PIAD. You look at the price to earnings, you look at the yield, you look at assets, you look at debt. And that is the traditional way that people use for valuing shares, to see whether or not a share is undervalued. But what exactly is value? Now, I use this analogy quite often, so if any of you have seen this before, I apologize. But I like to use it because it explains what we mean by value. Now, you look at this old car here, $1,000, good condition, one careful owner, low mileage, I think, yeah, and a full service history. So I can give you the book, and it shows you that this car has been serviced over a long period of time. Is this car good value for money? Right. I'd like a show of hands, please. Anybody think this car is good value for money? You want to buy it for $1,000? Anybody here? Well, one person? Yeah. Two person? Two people? A few? Okay. So a few of you think that this car is good value for money. Now, what if I told you that other cars in the market, same car, similar car, are selling now for $5,000? It means that you could have bought that old banger for $1,000, sell it in the market for $5,000 because that's the going price for this. So therefore, it is value. And that is the traditional way that a lot of people look at value shares. They say that if something is selling cheaper in the market than other similar shares, then it is a value share. So value is not about cheapness, but unreasonable cheapness. That old banger that you saw was unreasonably cheap compared to other cars in the market. So therefore, it is perceived to be cheap. But cheap rubbish is still rubbish. That is still a rubbish share, right? It is cheap, but it's still rubbish. So when you buy this value share, what do you do when the value goes up? When somebody does offer you $5,000 for that $1,000 car that you own, what do you do with it? Do you sell or do you hold the shares? This man here, Benjamin Graham, said, you sell. If somebody's going to offer you $5,000 for that old banger, you sell. This man says, no, you don't. This man is Warren Buffett. He says you don't, because what you need to do is to evaluate what this asset means to you over the long term. So who is right? This man here, One Puff Graham, who says take one puff out of the car, and if it goes up in value, sell it. So that's One Puff Graham. Warren Buffett, on the other hand, is somebody I call the long drag Buffett. He says, if this car will keep you going for a long time, you keep on running that car and enjoy the benefits of that particular motor vehicle. I took Warren Buffett's advice over 10 years ago when I looked at a company called British American Tobacco. I have to stress here that British American Tobacco, its products are bad for your health, but its dividends are good for your wealth, right? 10 years ago, I looked at British American Tobacco, and back in 2000, the PE ratio for British American Tobacco was hovering around 8. It was unreasonably cheap. And the reason it was unreasonably cheap was because of something that was going on back in 2000. It was something called TMT, Telecoms, Media, and Technology. Everybody wanted to own TMT shares until it became TNT shares, when they exploded in everybody's faces. But this particular company, British American Tobacco, was on a PE of 8, and I said, hey, this looks unreasonably cheap, a bit like that old banger. It doesn't make any sense to me why this company is so cheap. So I bought British American Tobacco. The dividend yield on British American Tobacco at the time was getting on for 6%, and it carried on paying dividends over that period of time. The amount of dividends I got from this company back in 2000, 22p, then it went 29, 32, 35, 38, 41. It is because it was so cash generative. It kept on generating cash, and it said, we don't know what to do with this cash. We know how to make cigarettes. We have this old machine here that keeps on churning out cigarettes. People keep on buying it, so we make all this cash. What are we going to do with it? So we just give it to shareholders. As a result, British American Tobacco's dividends kept on increasing over time. What do you think happened to the share price of British American Tobacco over those 12 years? The blue line shows what BAT shares have done over the 12-year period. They started at around £10 a share. Today they are close on to £35 a share. simply because the company kept on paying dividends. And eventually people said, it doesn't make sense that this company is paying dividends. Why am I buying other shares when this one here just keeps on churning out cash for the investors? I better get on board, and consequently the share price rises. Now, the red line shows what's been happening to the UK stock market over that same period. So British American Tobacco shares have beaten the market in America. This is just one example of a company that nobody loved, nobody wanted. I went and bought it. I didn't buy the whole company. I only bought a few shares. I wish I bought the whole company. But this is what happens to a company if you have a long-term vision of what the company is all about. This is part of the reason why Warren Buffett said that growth and value are joined at the hip. In other words, you cannot just simply sort of say, oh, this is a value share, because value shares and growth shares can be joined at the hip. They can be the same company. In other words, a value company can grow at the same time. And a good example of this is the company that Warren Buffett bought many, many years ago. It is called Coca-Cola. Coca-Cola was the company that Warren Buffett bought. Today, the share price of Coca-Cola is $41 a share. When he bought it, it was $3.75. And the reason for that is because of the dividends. Back in 1988, the dividend yield was a measly 4%, not particularly good. But Coca-Cola has increased its dividends for 50 years. Every year it has been able to increase its dividends. Why? Because it doesn't have to spend a lot of money on research and development. They know how to make Coca-Cola. All they need to do is to bottle the stuff, put it into cans, sell it, and people will buy it. It is also an example of a company which I call inflation-proof, because it can increase its prices in line with inflation or above the rate of inflation without people even noticing that the price has been increased. How many people here know what a can of Coke costs today? Please show your hands. A few people. You see, most people don't even know how much a can of Coke costs. They just go, can of Coke, please, go and buy it, and that's it. Coca-Cola can increase its price. Because the price is so insignificant compared to the other things that you buy, if it puts it up by 5%, would you know? The answer is you wouldn't know. You haven't any idea whether or not they've increased their prices. It could be a couple of cents, it could be 10 cents, 5 cents, they'll put it on, and you wouldn't even know. But if they put it up by 5%, they've beaten inflation here in Singapore, because Singapore inflation is running at 4.9%. So it has been able to increase its price above the rate of inflation. Coca-Cola's dividend today is about $1 a share, which means that when Warren Buffett bought it in 1988, he is earning 27% in dividends on the original price of the Coca-Cola that he bought. And this is a concept called yield on cost. In other words, you buy a share, and if the company increases its dividends over time, you are benefiting from that. Now, I don't normally reveal secrets about my portfolio, but my portfolio contains a lot of things. It will contain the current share price of the shares that I own. It has things like the earnings forecast, which I try and project over time, dividend yields, and discounted cash flows. Lots of other things as well. But can you see what is missing from this list? A very obvious thing is missing from this list. What is missing from this list? Anybody know? Anybody want to hazard a guess? Yes? The buy price. That's right. The buy price is missing from there. Why is the buy price missing from there? Because I don't care. I bought the share. That's money already spent. Do I care what price I bought for the share? Is that going to affect the way that I think now about the company? The only time I care about it is if ever I want to sell the share and I want to know whether I made a profit or a loss for my own personal purpose. But apart from that, I don't really care, because I don't want to be constrained by what price I paid for a share as to whether I carry on holding the share today or whether I sell it. What is really important to me is what is the company doing now, what it will do in the future, and has the story changed? If the story has changed for the better, I will hold it. If the story has changed for the worse and I have no confidence in the company, I will sell it. The price that I bought the shares at is irrelevant. It isn't relevant to my decisions today. And that is one of the big mistakes that many private investors make. They think that, oh, I bought this share for $1 a share. It is now 80 cents a share. If I sell it, I'm going to lose 20 cents a share. So therefore, I'm going to hold on to it. That is the wrong mentality to have. So in order to be a good yield-on-cost investor, somebody who buys a share and invests for the long term, you have to understand the business. You have to understand how it generates profits. You have to understand the dividend policy. And finally, you have to have patience. You have to have the patience of Buffett. You have to have the patience of Quo in order to actually sort of say, I'm going to hold on to this share for the long term and enjoy the yield on cost over that period of time. Now, it's all very well sort of saying I want to be a yield-on-cost investor or I want to be a pie investor looking at traditional values. But recently, I visited a company here in Singapore called Biosensors International. And when I visited the company, I was quite impressed with everything that was going on. And I also asked the company why it was able to succeed in developing a stent that had eluded so many other companies in America. I mean, this company is small, it's tiny compared to the likes of Johnson & Johnson. How was it able to develop a stent that was so revolutionary that had eluded big American and European pharmaceutical companies? And the CFO told me it was luck, lah. He said it was just luck. I said, really? Sam Goldwyn once said, the harder I work, the luckier I get. And when I looked at this company, I thought, yeah, you know, this company works hard at what it does. It's not luck. They just kept on going. They kept on trying to try and develop this stent that was going to be a world beater. If you ever look at what Biosensors has done, back in 2008, it was around 20 cents a share. Today, it's a lot higher than that, getting close onto £1. It's beaten the Singapore market. And I'd like to leave you with a final thought. When you look at companies, when I looked at Biosensors, I'm not recommending Biosensors, by the way, but I'm just using it as an example of a company. Tom Gardner said, when you go and look at these companies, look at the culture of the company, look at how it treats its workers, look at how it treats its shareholders, how it treats its suppliers. These are more important things than just simply looking at numbers. These are things that you will never, ever be able to put onto a spreadsheet. And what Gardner said was that a healthy culture is a wonderful North Star guide point for investors to find the organizations that they should invest in for the long term. And when I was at Biosensors, I just casually asked the guy. I went together with my colleague, Sir Jing, and the two of us asked him, what is the staff turnover rate at this company? And he said, it's below 5%. And that is really, truly amazing, you know, for a Singapore economy where the unemployment rate is so low. People can just jump from one company to another because the unemployment rate is so ridiculously low here in Singapore. And yet this company is able to retain its workers. So that is the hard work that this company has been putting in. It's putting in the hard work in terms of developing its employees, ensuring that it has a long-term future. And that is really why, as an investor, yes, by all means, look at the traditional things like price to earnings, look at the return on capital, but that only tells you part of the story about the culture of an organization. The other part is really what this company is all about over the long term. And personally, I think that, you know, a company like Biosensors, if it carries on doing what it does, then it does have a good long-term future. So I thank you so much for listening to me this morning. My name is David Kuo, and I'm from this website, www.fool.sg. Thank you so much.